As the officers escorted Darnell and his daughter out, Renee stayed behind, surveying the scene. The bomb squad confirmed that the explosives were real but hadn't been armed yet, a chilling reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. Outside, the crowd had grown, their murmurs filling the air as they watched the aftermath unfold. Brian stood near the perimeter, his emotions a whirlwind. He'd been skeptical of Renee from the start, but watching her handle the crisis had shifted something in him. She wasn't just competent, she was remarkable. As Renee emerged from the building, Brian approached her, his usual sharpness replaced by something softer. "That could have gone 100 different ways," he said. "But you kept it together." Renee glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before she nodded. "It's never easy, but you always have to believe there's a way to make it work." Brian hesitated, then extended his hand. "I might not have said it before, but you've earned my respect, Chief." Renee shook his hand, a small smile breaking through her stoic demeanor. "Glad to hear it, Officer Mitchell. Now let's make sure we keep earning it." As the scene began to wind down, a final twist came to light. The second man's identity was uncovered, an ex-con with a vendetta against the police. His plan had been to lure officers into the apartment and detonate the explosives, taking as many lives as possible. Darnell, unwittingly caught in the man's scheme, had become a hero in his own way, protecting his daughter and preventing a tragedy. The revelation left everyone shaken, but also reinforced the lesson Renee had tried to impart from the start. Even in the darkest moments, there's always a choice to fight for what's right. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the neighborhood, the chaos of the day began to settle into an uneasy calm. The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the street, casting long shadows against the buildings. Officers moved methodically, wrapping up the scene and gathering evidence, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. Renee stood near the command center, her posture straight despite the weariness etched on her face. She watched as Darnell sat on the curb, his daughter wrapped in a blanket beside him. The little girl clung to him, her small frame pressed tightly against his side, as if afraid to let go. Darnell's eyes were distant, his face a portrait of guilt and heartbreak, but there was also a flicker of something else, hope, perhaps, or at least relief that his daughter was safe. Brian walked up to Renee, his hands shoved into his pockets. For once, his usual sharp remarks were absent. Instead, his voice was quiet, almost reflective. "I still don't know how you kept your cool back there," he said. "That could have gone south in so many ways." Renee glanced at him, her expression softening. "It's not about keeping your cool, Mitchell. It's about staying focused on the people who need you. Darnell may have made mistakes, but he loves his daughter. And when it came down to it, he chose to protect her. That's what mattered most." Brian nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. He looked back at Darnell and his daughter, then at the officers who were finishing their work. "You were right about something else too," he admitted. "This job isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about understanding the people behind it. I think I forgot that somewhere along the way." Renee offered a small smile. "We all do sometimes. What matters is that we remember it when it counts." The scene began to clear as officers packed up their equipment and the crowd dispersed. The little girl was taken to a nearby ambulance for a checkup, and a social worker arrived to ensure she would be cared for. Darnell was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, but he didn't resist. Before he was placed in the squad car, he turned to Renee, his voice raw with emotion. "Thank you," he said, "for listening, for not giving up on me." Renee met his gaze, her voice steady. "You did the hard part, Darnell. You made the right choice. That's what your daughter will remember." As the car pulled away, Brian leaned against the hood of his cruiser, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. "Think he's got a chance to turn things around?" he asked. Renee crossed her arms, her gaze thoughtful. "I think he's got a long road ahead, but he's taken the first step. Sometimes that's the hardest part." The street grew quieter as the last of the vehicles drove off. Renee lingered for a moment, taking in the stillness that replaced the earlier chaos. She let out a slow. The younger man's presence immediately shifted the mood. He didn't say a word, but the way he carried himself spoke volumes. Disciplined, confident, and ready. The lead biker hesitated, glancing between the father and son. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. The rest of the bikers shifted uneasily, the cocky bravado that had filled the room moments before beginning to crumble. The veteran didn't turn to look at his son, but a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The air was thick with tension, the stakes now higher than ever. No one in the room could predict what was about to happen next, but one thing was clear. The bikers were now up against far more than they had bargained for. The lead biker took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure, but the weight of the moment was too much. "Let's see what you've got," he said, his voice less steady than before. Before the veteran could respond, his son stepped forward, calmly placing himself between his father and the biker. "You've made your point," the younger man said, his tone firm but even. "But this isn't a fight you want to start." His words hung in the air, filled with quiet authority. The lead biker looked around at his crew, realizing they were no longer as confident as they'd been earlier. The tension reached its peak as the room waited for the next move. Then, to everyone's surprise, the veteran stepped up beside his son and extended a hand to the biker. "Sometimes it takes more strength to walk away," he said simply, his voice calm but commanding. The biker stared at the hand for a moment, his pride and ego wrestling with the unexpected gesture. Finally, he shook it, his grip tight but respectful. As the bikers filed out, muttering under their breath, the cafe buzzed with quiet murmurs. The veteran sat back down, his son joining him. The younger man smiled and said, "You always know how to handle things." The veteran chuckled, replying, "Experience teaches you a lot. But I didn't expect you to show up." His son grinned. "Let's just say I had a feeling." As the door closed behind the bikers, the cafe returned to its normal hum, though the story of what had just happened would be told in the town for years to come. As the cafe settled back into its usual rhythm, a quiet sense of relief filled the room. The other patrons exchanged nods of respect with the veteran and his son, silently acknowledging the lesson